to Money News with Ross Greenwood, live across Australia.
Great to have your company here on Money News on Thursday, October 24, 2019. Plenty of stuff going on. Just in the next little while, we're going to speak with a senator. This is the Northern Territory Labor Senator, Malarndirri McCarthy. Now, she's been in a Senate estimates today asking questions of the Department of Human Services. Now, you may be aware in 4 parts of Australia, over the last little while, they've been trialling a new way of welfare recipients with cashless debit cards. Now, these cashless debit cards are all about trying to make certain that people spend money on the right things and not on the wrong things. So the right things are their groceries, their electricity bills, whatever it might be. The wrong things would be gambling, alcohol, all that type of thing. Now, the interesting part about this byplay that took place in the Senate hearings today was all about what else could be paid for with these cashless debit cards. So here is Senator McCarthy today in the Senate estimates hearing with the Department of Human Services.
Just straight to the point here, we've heard different things, obviously, over the past month or so. Can the cashless debit card be used to purchase legal sex services?
Liz Heffrenberg, Deputy Secretary, Department of Social Services. Yes.
And are there any restrictions with the kinds of legal sex services you can purchase with the cashless debit card?
No.
How many times has the cashless debit card been used at a brothel?
We don't have that data.
Or by a sole trading sex worker?
We don't have that information.
So it raises questions there quite clearly, doesn't it, about what should be allowed to be purchased and what shouldn't. Now, in some ways you might have some sympathy yourself and say, well, maybe that is an essential service. On the other hand, you don't want to have people exploited, because people who are exploited by others might end up paying more than what they should or can afford to, well, you know, in this particular case, get those sexual services. This is where there is a fundamental issue here in the way in which this has been rolled out. Now, there is also the issue of, well, freedom of choice to spend the money on whatever you wish to. If that means you go hungry, well, that's the way it is. But that's not the idea of this cashless debit card. The Northern Territory Labor Senator, Malarndirri McCarthy, is on the line right now. Senator McCarthy, thank you so much for your time. Just first thing, where did you get onto this idea to be able to ask this question in the first place?
Yeah, no, good question. Look, for your listeners, just so they know, 12 years ago, the federal intervention occurred in the Northern Territory based on concerns around children, child sex abuse, and the concerns around needing to prohibit items like alcohol, gambling and pornography. So that's happened and has been happening for the last 12 years.
So these are not such bad things to try and limit in communities that are vulnerable, that do have issues of abuse taking place, alcohol abuse, violence in those communities. So in that regard, is it a case where you are somewhat sympathetic in trying to change behaviours in those communities?
No, I'm actually trying to understand what has changed the government's policy, where they were so intent 12 years ago to put people on the basics card in the Northern Territory as a result of their concerns around gambling, alcohol and pornography. And now they want to roll out a new card over the basics card. So we're talking about 21,000 people in the Northern Territory who are on the basics card are now going to be moved to the cashless debit card. And that's why I said, well, hang on a minute. If you can purchase pornography on the cashless debit card, but you've got people on the basics card where they can't, where has been your change in policy and why have you changed? Is there evidence to show that things have improved? So this is my line of questioning.
It's a very good line of questioning because, again, clearly it is about trying to change behaviour. In your sort of travels and you go through communities, do you see changes in behaviour as a result of these cashless debit cards and basic debit cards inside some of these communities?
Well, yeah, again, it's more the anecdotal evidence, and most of the feedback I get from people is real concern that they have no power over their financial situation and that they can't rise above poverty in their respective areas. So when the federal government said it's now going to roll out the cashless debit card, I said, whoa, hang on a minute. Where has been your evaluation on the current card, and where is your evidence to show that that has even worked before you move people onto a new card, which exposes them to the very things you try to prohibit them to, which is, in this case, pornography?
So one of the issues that I have, and I know some of the most vulnerable communities in Australia have been Aboriginal communities when it came to the Royal Commission into misconduct in banking and insurance, where insurance products and some other financial products were sold to those communities, and the people didn't know what they were buying. They were, sort of effectively almost bamboozled into buying products that gave very high commissions to those people who sold. And so my real concern here is people with cashless debit cards who are seeking to buy things that might be outside of the remit of their card, which is broadly, and I've got it in front of me, you can use it for school excursions, the tuck shop, for garage sales. The money on the card can be used to shop, to pay bills, to buy cards, but no grog, no gambling, no cash. The issue I have here, if a person chooses to have some of those things, they may very well sell away their rights to this cashless debit card at a lower than face value price, and that's what really concerns me.
You're spot on, Ross, and you would have seen that with the Royal Commission, that there is complete exploitation in these regional areas of Australia, in particular the First Nations communities. And the government's spending over $100 million on this Inju card, the cashless debit card, which is designed to restrict people's purchases. But people can, on this card, they can transfer money to other people on the card. So it just has too many faults and flaws, and I'm just trying to examine it in the estimates inquiry here.
And the other point also is it just seems as though the rollout, as you say, if there's been a change in rules, a change of policy, then we do need to know about it, because as we are talking about some of the people who are the most vulnerable in our community, and they do need to have their basics. But my point to you is, though, Senator, I mean, when you do travel through the Northern Territory, where you do go to some of these areas where they have had the basics card, has there been, in your observation, the anecdotal stuff, has there been that genuine change in these communities whereby there's less grog, where there's less tobacco, where there's fewer drugs, where there is less pornography, where there's less, if you like, exploitation of these people?
Sadly, Ross, I have to say that what concerns me is we've seen an increase in the incarceration of people, in the early deaths and assisted or attempted suicides of people, in the increase in family and domestic violence. So anecdotally, that's certainly been the case. And I know from just my own experience in the Gulf country where families are really, really suffering. So it's critical that we understand what the policy change has been here and why, and where is the evidence to support it.
And just to tell me, as you've gone down this path, the actual connection with Inju and the rollout of these cards, have you been able to get any information about the contract that goes behind this, the length of the contract, the way in which it rolls out, and indeed, whether there is any money being made off the side by virtue of the distribution of these cards?
Look, at the moment, the information that we're receiving, certainly through an inquiry as well, is that $100 million is being spent on the Inju card, Ross, and all I can see is a waste of money here. It doesn't create a single job for participants on the card, and I just think that if we're talking about creating jobs and making sure pensioners have houses, well, let's make sure these decisions are made with proper evidence-based values, and at this point, it's absent.
And we're going to say that, given the fact, and I even noticed today, that banks are now significantly winding back the number of bank branches they've got around Australia. I think there was another 250, or I'll get the number, but it was a big number that have been knocked out just in the last year. What you really don't want is people effectively trading away their pensions for less money to be able to get services that otherwise might not be available on them. That is one of the real issues that the government has got to address. Labor Senator for Northern Territory, Malarndirri McCarthy, who raised that issue and very sensibly raised that issue in Senate estimates today, because while you might very much have a welfare view about what should be spent and what shouldn't be spent with the welfare dollars, and I get that thoroughly, I totally understand that, but whether practically you're able to control it and therefore make certain you're protecting the people you're seeking to protect, I think that's another question altogether. And that's the reason why the Senator's questions were so good today. And I appreciate your time on the program this evening.
Thank you, Ross. Thank you to your listeners.
There you go. So it really, even though you may be able to trivialise that, and even though you might sit there and go, oh, well, isn't that very funny? The truth is it strikes a point about, again, where the money goes, how it is spent, whether it genuinely is improving the lot of people's lives. I said that Royal Commission, when you saw plane loads of really commission-based salespeople getting off and signing vulnerable people up to products that they should never have been signed up to, you really do recognise there is a fundamental issue still in our community where people are exploited, and we're talking about some of our poorest people. Now, not just in Indigenous communities, but broadly in poor communities around this nation. And, of course, in drought, while we've got right now in many communities, there is genuinely a lack of money around the place. And so, any money that is handed out, it's valuable, it's precious. And you can't have it wasted. But there's your problem. As soon as you start to prescribe where people can spend their money, you raise other questions and issues as well. I'll take your calls on that one on 131873. More money news coming up.
There's nothing like an Aussie summer. And to kick it off this year,